They kept their hope alive, Helen reported, watching as freed prisoners from dozens of species embraced each other with tears of joy. Even under the worst conditions, they never stopped feeling. The liberated prisoners became some of humanity's strongest allies. They had maintained their emotions despite Confederation attempts to suppress them, and they understood the value of what humans were fighting to protect. Dr. Elizabeth Turner's research into Confederation psychology finally bore fruit when she discovered the source of their emotional suppression. Ancient records showed that the Confederation species had once been as emotional as humans, but they had been conquered by an even older civilization that had forced them to become cold and logical. "They're victims too," Elizabeth explained to Admiral Sullivan. "The Confederation isn't evil. They're traumatized. Someone broke them emotionally thousands of years ago, and they've been perpetuating that trauma ever since." This discovery changed the entire nature of the human campaign. They weren't just fighting an enemy, they were healing a wounded galaxy. The turning point came when Thought Node Prime 7 of the Scion publicly announced his defection to the human cause. In a broadcast that reached every Confederation world, he spoke about the beauty of emotions and the emptiness of purely logical existence. "I have touched the minds of humans," he said, his form pulsing with colors of joy and wonder. "I have felt their love for each other, their hope for the future, their courage in the face of danger. This is what we gave up in the name of efficiency. This is what we must reclaim." His words inspired similar defections across the galaxy. Confederation leaders found themselves commanding forces that were increasingly unwilling to fight against an enemy that offered them the gift of feeling. Hi, Arbiter Vex 9, once the most powerful being in the galaxy, sat alone in his chambers aboard the flagship Absolute Logic. For the first time in his existence, he was experiencing something that might have been despair. His subordinates had stopped reporting to him. His fleets were defecting to the human cause. His carefully ordered universe was dissolving into emotional chaos, and the strangest part was that some small part of him, a part he didn't understand and couldn't control, was glad. The humans had done more than defeat the Confederation militarily. They had reminded an entire galaxy what it meant to feel, to hope, to love. And once that reminder took hold, there was no going back. The galaxy was awakening from a sleep that had lasted for thousands of years, and humanity was leading that. Awakening with the same emotions the Confederation had once dismissed as weakness. 2 years after first contact, the massive fleet approaching Nexus Prime looked nothing like the small diplomatic mission that had once been dismissed from this world. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded hundreds of ships, human vessels flying alongside Zentari cruisers, Korthak battleships, Scion research vessels, and ships from dozens of other species that had rediscovered their emotions. "Admiral," reported Captain Tony Miller from his position at the communications station, "we're receiving surrender offers from 12 different Confederation strongholds. They want to negotiate." Kate smiled, remembering how different things had been when Jake Harrison first tried to negotiate with these same aliens. "Put me through to Nexus Prime Command." The image that appeared on the main screen was shocking to those who remembered the old Confederation leadership. High Arbiter Vex 9 no longer used his cold unit designation. He had chosen to call himself simply Vex, and his usually steady blue lights flickered with what could only be called nervousness. "Admiral Sullivan," Vex said, his voice carrying tones that hadn't existed in Zentari speech for thousands of years. We The former Confederation Council requests an audience. We wish to discuss terms. Terms? Kate asked, though she kept her voice gentle. She had learned that the former Confederation leaders were struggling with their newly awakened emotions, often feeling overwhelmed by sensations they had no experience processing. "We surrender," Vex said simply. The word seemed to cause him pain, but also something that might have been relief. "Your forces have shown us the emptiness of our existence. We no longer wish to rule through the suppression of feeling." Jake Harrison, now holding the title of Galactic Diplomatic Coordinator, stepped forward. The same man who had been dismissed from this world 2 years ago was returning as the architect of a new galactic order. "We don't want your surrender, Vex," Jake said, using the Zentari's chosen name rather than his old designation. "We want your partnership in building something better." The final negotiation took place in the same chamber where humanity had first been rejected. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The former Confederation leaders sat alongside human diplomats, freed subject species, and defected Confederation forces. War Chief Gorth of the Korthak had tears running down his rocky face, a sight that would have been impossible under the old regime. "I remember now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I remember what it felt like to fight to protect others, not just to conquer them." Thought Node Prime 7 of the Scion pulsed with soft, warm colors as he spoke. We had forgotten the beauty of consciousness itself. Humans have reminded us that existence without feeling is not truly living. Even the mysterious crystalline collective had changed. Their representative, who now called herself Crystal Song instead of Unit 47, sparkled with inner light as she spoke. We had reduced ourselves to mere calculations. Now we remember the joy of creation, the wonder of discovery. Dr. Sam Peters, the psychologist who had witnessed the first failed diplomatic mission, was amazed by the transformation. "It's remarkable," he told Admiral Sullivan privately. "They're like children learning to feel for the first time. Everything is new and overwhelming to them. The solution they worked out was unprecedented in galactic history. Rather than replacing one empire with another, they would create something entirely new: the Terran Galactic Union, a voluntary association of worlds based on emotional freedom and mutual support. Every species will have the right to feel," Jake explained as he outlined the new government's principles. "No one will be forced to suppress their emotions for the sake of efficiency or control." The former Confederation worlds didn't just agree to join, they begged to be included. Entire populations that had lived under emotionless rule for centuries were desperate to experience the full range of feelings that humans took for granted. Captain Lisa Morgan, who had been part of the original diplomatic mission, found herself assigned to help establish the new government on Nexus Prime. She worked alongside Vex, the former High Arbiter, who was struggling to understand concepts like empathy and compassion. "I do not comprehend how you make decisions based on these feelings," Vex told her one day as they worked on the new constitution. "The emotions seem to contradict each other. How do you choose between them?" Lisa smiled. "You don't choose between them, Vex. You use all of them together. That's what makes us human. We can feel multiple emotions at once and somehow find wisdom in the complexity." The transformation wasn't always easy. Some former Confederation species struggled with their newly awakened emotions. The Korthak warriors had to learn that strength could come from protecting others, rather than dominating them. The Scion telepaths were overwhelmed by the emotional complexity they could suddenly perceive in every mind around them. but humanity was there to help. Human teachers traveled to every world in the new Union, sharing not just technology and knowledge, but more importantly, showing other species how to live with emotions. Children played the most important role in this transformation. On worlds. Across the galaxy, human children played alongside young Zentari, Korthak, Scion, and dozens of other species. The next generation grew up taking emotions for granted, unable to imagine a universe where feelings were suppressed. Emma Davis, a 10-year-old girl from Earth, became best friends with a young Zentari named Vex Minor, who later chose the name Glow. They played games that would have been impossible under the old Confederation, games based on imagination, creativity, and emotional expression. Emotional connections cannot provide tactical advantages, he told himself, his lights flickering with what an observer might have mistaken for doubt. Logic is superior to feeling in all circumstances, but the evidence was mounting against this fundamental belief. Human forces were winning battles through coordination that should have been impossible. They were making sacrifices for each other that no logical species would consider. And somehow, these irrational actions were defeating Confederation forces throughout the galaxy. Dr. Sam Peters, studying reports from the front lines, made an observation that would change human military doctrine forever. We're not just fighting for territory or resources. We're fighting for each other. And that's something the aliens can't understand or counter. The Confederation had dismissed human emotion as weakness, never realizing it was actually humanity's greatest weapon. Every captured human made the others fight harder. Every rescued soldier strengthened the bonds between all humans. Every shared victory built an emotional network that spanned the galaxy. The aliens had thought they were fighting a primitive species driven by chemical reactions. They were actually facing something they had never encountered before, a species whose strength came not from logic or technology, but from their unbreakable emotional connections to each other. And those connections were about to change the course of galactic history. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood before the largest gathering of human military leaders in history. Officers from every colony, every fleet, every settlement had come together for one purpose: the liberation of the galaxy from Confederation rule. "Today we begin Operation Righteous Fury," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast assembly hall. "We're not just fighting for human space anymore. We're fighting to free every species that has been forced to suppress their emotions under Confederation control." Commander Sarah Brooks had just returned from the most dangerous mission of the war. She and her team had infiltrated a Zentari research facility deep in Confederation space, and what they discovered there changed everything. "They weren't always like this," Sarah reported to the assembled commanders. "The Confederation species had emotions once, just like us. But something happened thousands of years ago. They were forced to suppress their feelings, to become cold and logical." She activated a holographic display showing brain scans from different alien species. "Look at these neural pathways. They're still there, just blocked. The emotions are still inside them, waiting to be awakened." Dr. Nathan Cole, Earth's leading expert in psychological warfare, stepped forward. "This gives us a new weapon. We can't just defeat the Confederation militarily, we can free them psychologically." The plan was audacious beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. Instead of simply fighting Confederation forces, they would launch a campaign to awaken emotions. Throughout the galaxy, human ships would broadcast music, art, and expressions of feeling to every Confederation world they encountered. The first test came at the Battle of Rigel 7. Captain Alex Rivera's fleet engaged a Confederation force, while simultaneously broadcasting human emotional content across all frequencies. The humans fought with their usual passionate intensity, but something unexpected happened to their enemies. A Zentari ship commander, designated Fleet Unit Zex-9, found himself listening to a human song about loss and hope. For the first time in his artificial existence, he felt something. A strange sensation he couldn't identify or process. "Weapons offline," he reported to his crew, though he couldn't explain why he had given that order. I do not wish to cause destruction today." Similar scenes played out across the Confederation fleet. Korthak warriors began questioning why they were fighting creatures who sang about protecting their families. Scion telepaths became overwhelmed by the emotional complexity they were suddenly able to perceive in the human broadcasts. The battle ended not with Confederation defeat, but with Confederation confusion. Half their ships simply stopped fighting, their crews struggling with feelings they had never experienced before. Word of Rigel 7 spread quickly through Confederation space. High Arbiter Vex 9 called an emergency session of the ruling council. "The humans have deployed some kind of psychological weapon," he reported, his lights flickering with what his advisors didn't recognize as the first stirrings of fear. "Our forces are becoming unreliable." War Chief Gorth of the Korthak slammed his stone fist on the council table, but the gesture seemed less certain than usual. "My warriors report strange sensations during combat. They speak of not wanting to harm others, a concept that makes no tactical sense." The Scion representative, Thought Node Prime 7, pulsed with colors that hadn't been seen in their species for millennia. "I have been analyzing human emotional patterns. There is beauty in their chaos, purpose in their seeming irrationality." "Impossible," declared Vex 9, but his certainty was wavering. "Emotion is weakness. Logic is strength. This has been proven across thousands of years, but proof was crumbling throughout Confederation space. On the industrial world of Mechanus Prime, Zentari workers began creating art instead of weapons, after exposure to human cultural broadcasts. On the warrior planet of Korthak 7, soldiers started questioning orders to attack civilian targets. The most dramatic change came among the Scion telepaths. Their artificial suppression of emotion had been the weakest, and exposure to human feelings hit them like a tidal wave. Telepaths across their homeworld began experiencing joy, sadness, love, and wonder for the first time in centuries. "This is what we lost," whispered Thought Node Prime 7 during a secret gathering of awakened Scion. "This is what makes existence meaningful." Admiral Chris Thompson led the human fleet that liberated the Epsilon colonies, former Confederation territory, where subject species had lived under emotionless rule for generations. What they found there amazed them. "The local populations are welcoming us as liberators," Thompson reported to Admiral Sullivan. "They're not fighting to defend Confederation rule. They're joining our cause." Species that had been conquered and controlled for centuries were rediscovering their own capacity for feeling. The insectoid Chitauri began composing music for the first time in 1,000 years. The aquatic depths dwellers started creating underwater sculptures that expressed joy and hope. But the most significant converts were the Confederation's own forces. Entire ships began defecting to the human cause as their crews experienced emotions they had forgotten they could feel. Captain Danny Ross found himself negotiating the surrender of a Zentari battleship whose crew had listened to human broadcasts about family and friendship. "We do not wish to fight you anymore," the ship's commander, now calling himself simply Vex instead of his unit designation, told Danny over the communication link. "Your emotions have shown us what we have lost. Will you teach us to feel again?" Thaddeus. Confederation's iron control over the galaxy began to crack as more and more of their own forces switched sides. High Arbiter Vex 9 tried to stop the spread of human emotional influence by jamming all communications, but it was too late. The emotions were spreading like a virus through Confederation space. Species that had been emotionally neutered for millennia were rediscovering love, hope, courage, and determination. And once they remembered what it felt like to feel, they didn't want to go back. On the Confederation capital world of Nexus Prime, riots broke out as citizens demanded the right to experience emotions. Zentari, who had been exposed to human broadcasts, led protests calling for the end of artificial emotional suppression. "We want to feel!" they chanted, their lights flickering in patterns that expressed excitement and hope, emotions that had been forbidden for so long that their language had no words for them. The Confederation military found itself fighting a war on two fronts. Human forces pressed their advantage from outside, while emotionally awakened citizens rebelled from within. The cold, logical structure that had held the galaxy in its grip for millennia was collapsing under the weight of rediscovered feelings. Major Helen Brooks led ground forces that liberated the prison planet of Torment Station, where the Confederation had held political dissidents from across the galaxy. What her troops found there was heartbreaking but also inspiring. The prisoners sat in the cold metal cells of the Confederation prison ship, but they were not broken. Steve Clark, a fighter pilot captured during the Battle of Titan's Gate, looked around at his fellow humans and felt something the aliens clearly hadn't expected: growing determination instead of despair. "They think this will make us give up," whispered Marine Rachel Davis from the cell next to his. Her arm was in a crude sling, but her eyes burned with fierce resolve. "They don't understand that making us suffer just makes us angrier." The Zentari guards moved past their cells like walking statues, their blue lights flickering in patterns that Steve had learned meant contempt. They had been studying their human prisoners for weeks, trying to understand why capture didn't seem to demoralize them the way it did other species. Back in human space, the war was changing in ways the Confederation had never seen before. Squadron leader Danny Ross led his fighter wing not through radio commands, but through something much deeper. His pilots had trained together, lived together, and fought together for so long that they could sense each other's moves before they happened. "Red 7, break left," Danny said into his radio, but pilot Maria Santos was already turning before the words reached her. She had felt his concern for her safety and responded to it automatically. "How did you know that missile was coming?" she asked after destroying the Confederation fighter that had been targeting her. "I didn't know," Danny replied. "I just felt that you were in danger." This kind of emotional connection was happening throughout the human fleet. Major Helen Brooks commanded ground troops who fought not just as soldiers, but as a family. When Private Mike Johnson was wounded, the entire squad felt his pain and fought twice as hard to protect him. When Corporal Janet Lee made a brilliant tactical move, the others understood her plan without explanation. The Confederation forces found themselves facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered in thousands of years of conquest. Human military units seemed to share a collective consciousness, moving and fighting as if they were parts of a single organism. War Coordinator Zex-7 studied battle reports in his command ship, the lights on his face flickering with what might have been frustration if Zentari could feel such things. "Explain this," he commanded his aide, pointing to a tactical display. "Human Unit 47 was cut off from all communication for 6 hours. How did they coordinate their attack on our supply depot?" Vec 12's lights dimmed as he processed the data. "Unknown, War Coordinator. Their radio systems were completely jammed. Visual contact was impossible, yet they attacked with perfect timing from 3 different directions." "Run the analysis again," Zex-7 ordered. "There must be a logical explanation." But there wasn't. At least, not one that the Confederation could understand. The humans had coordinated their attack through empathy, through their emotional connection to each other. They had felt what their comrades needed and acted on it. Dr. Elizabeth Turner was making similar discoveries in her laboratory on Earth. She had been studying captured Confederation soldiers, trying to understand their psychology. What she found surprised her. "Admiral," she reported to Kate Sullivan via video link, "the aliens haven't always been emotionless. I found traces in their brain structure, or what passes for brains in their species. They had emotions once, but they suppressed them artificially." Kate leaned forward in her chair. "Are you saying they chose to remove their emotions?" "More than that," Elizabeth replied. "I think they were forced to. Look at these genetic markers in the Zentari samples. This kind of modification doesn't happen naturally. Someone or something made them this way." The implications were staggering. The Confederation's greatest strength, their logical, emotionless approach to everything, might actually be an artificial weakness imposed on them. Long ago. Meanwhile, Ben Parker's team had made their own breakthrough with emotional computer viruses. They had successfully infected a Confederation communications satellite, and the results were spreading through their network like wildfire. "It's beautiful," Ben told Admiral Sullivan, showing her the virus's progress on his screens. "The emotional algorithms are confusing their AI systems so badly that some are actually trying to feel things. Watch this." On the screen, they could see data from a Confederation battleship, where the main computer was trying to process fear. The ship's weapon systems kept misfiring as the AI struggled to understand why it suddenly didn't want to hurt anyone. But the real breakthrough came when the Confederation made a terrible mistake. They decided to interrogate their human prisoners more aggressively, thinking that enough pain would break their emotional bonds and make them compliant. They were wrong. Steve Clark endured hours of questioning about human military tactics. The Zentari interrogator, designated Interrogation Unit Zex-4, couldn't understand why causing pain didn't make the human more cooperative. "Your suffering serves no logical purpose," Zex-4 told him. "Provide the information we require, and the pain will cease." Steve spat blood and smiled. "You still don't get it, do you? The more you hurt me, the more my people will fight to rescue me. Every human in the fleet is connected to every other human. When you hurt me, you hurt all of us. And that just makes us stronger." The Zentari's lights flickered in what might have been confusion. "This is irrational. Individual survival should take priority over group loyalty." "For you, maybe," Steve replied. "But we're human. We don't abandon each other." His words proved prophetic. When news of the prisoner ship reached human command, the emotional response was immediate and overwhelming. Admiral Sullivan didn't need to order a rescue mission. Every human ship in the sector was already turning toward the prison ship's location. "We're going to get them back," declared Captain Tony Miller, his voice carrying the determination of every human who heard it. "All of them." The rescue operation was a masterpiece of emotional coordination. Ships from 6 different fleets converged on the prison ship, their crews working together as if they had trained for this mission their entire lives. They hadn't. They were operating purely on their shared need to save their captured comrades. Captain Lisa Morgan led the boarding party that broke into the prison ship. She moved through the corridors, not with a map, but with an instinctive sense of where her people were being held. Her emotional connection to the prisoners guided her straight to them. "I knew you'd come," Rachel Davis said when the rescue team reached her cell. "I could feel all of you getting closer." The Confederation guards were overwhelmed by humans who fought with desperate fury to protect their rescued friends. The aliens' logical battle plans crumbled against such emotional intensity. As the human prisoners were brought back to safety, something unexpected happened. The rescue had been broadcast across human communication networks, and the emotional impact spread to every human settlement in the galaxy. Children in schools felt pride in their military. Families felt hope that their loved ones would never be abandoned. Workers in factories felt a connection to the soldiers fighting for them. The entire human species seemed to pulse with shared determination. But the most important effect was on the Confederation itself. Other species under their rule had monitored the rescue operation, and they were asking uncomfortable questions. "Why do the humans fight so hard for each other?" asked a Korthak officer to his commander. "Our doctrine teaches that individual survival is paramount." "Because they are primitive and emotional," his commander replied, but the words sounded less certain than before. Similar conversations were happening across the Confederation. The Scion telepaths were particularly troubled because they could sense the emotional connections between humans, something they had lost in their own species long ago. One Scion, designated Thought Node Prime 7, made a request that shocked the Confederation leadership. "I wish to study these human emotions more closely. There may be tactical advantages we have overlooked." High Arbiter Vex 9 considered this request in his chambers aboard the flagship Absolute Logic. The humans were proving far more difficult to defeat than predicted. Their emotional bonds seemed to make them stronger in ways that contradicted all Confederation knowledge. 6 months after the failed meeting at Nexus Prime, Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the command center of Earth's defense headquarters. Red warning lights flashed across dozens of screens, each one showing another human colony under attack. "New. Brisbane is gone," reported Commander Nick Taylor, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That's the 5th colony this month." Kate clenched her jaw as she studied the tactical displays. The Galactic Confederation had decided that humanity's emotional weakness made them easy targets. Their fleets were systematically attacking human settlements, expecting quick surrender from a species they considered too unstable to fight effectively. "Any survivors?" Kate asked. "A few escape pods made it out," Nick replied. "But the main settlement, 3 million people, Admiral." Kate felt the familiar burn of rage in her chest. But this time she didn't push it down like military training had taught her. Instead, she let it fuel her thinking. The aliens thought human emotions made them weak. It was time to prove them wrong. "Get me Dr. Sam Peters and Colonel Amy Foster," she ordered. "We're changing how we fight this war." An hour later, the 3 of them sat in a secure briefing room. Dr. Peters, the psychologist who had been part of the original diplomatic mission, looked tired but determined. Colonel Foster, Earth's best military strategist, had been working non-stop since the attacks began. "The Confederation expects us to fight like they do," Kate said, pacing in front of a star map. "Cold, logical, following predictable patterns. But what if we don't?" "What do you mean?" asked Amy Foster. I mean, we use what they think is our weakness as our strength, Kate replied. They can't understand emotions, right? So let's fight with emotions. Dr. Peters leaned forward in his chair. That goes against every military doctrine we've ever developed. Emotions in combat lead to mistakes, poor decisions. Do they? Kate interrupted. Or is that just what we've been told? Think about it, Sam. When a mother defends her child, is she weaker because she's emotional? When soldiers fight harder because they love their comrades, is that a weakness? Amy Foster was already nodding. I've seen it in combat reports. Units that have strong emotional bonds perform better than those that don't. They take more risks for each other. They don't give up as easily. Exactly, said Kate. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to train our forces to use their emotions, not suppress them. The first test came 2 weeks later. The Confederation fleet attacked Haven Station, a mining outpost in the outer colonies. Captain Tony Miller commanded the station's small defense force, just 6 fighters and a handful of patrol ships. According to every computer model, Haven Station should have fallen in minutes. The Confederation ships were bigger, faster, and more heavily armed. But Captain Miller and his pilots had been through Kate's new training program. Remember what we practiced, Miller told his pilots over the radio. Don't think like machines. Feel what you need to do. Pilot Jenny Clark was thinking about her brother, who had died in the New Brisbane attack. Her anger burned hot and clean as she dove her fighter straight at a Confederation cruiser, pulling out at the last second to fire into its weak points. The alien computers couldn't predict such a suicidal attack. Lieutenant Dan Ross felt the fear for his crewmates driving him to impossible maneuvers, weaving between enemy ships in patterns that made no logical sense but somehow worked perfectly. His protective instincts told him exactly where to be to shield the other fighters. Back on the station, Sergeant Lisa Kane's ground forces prepared for boarding parties. Instead of following standard defensive positions, she had her troops think about the families they were protecting, the friends who had already died. Their desperate determination led them to set traps in places no logical defender would think to use. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, Haven Station was still in human hands, and half the Confederation fleet was destroyed or retreating. The aliens had never faced an enemy that fought with such chaotic, unpredictable passion. How did they do that? War Coordinator Zek 7 of the Zentari asked his staff. Our battle computers predicted total victory in 12 minutes. His aide, a younger Zentari called Vec 12, flickered his lights in confusion. The humans made 17 tactically unsound decisions. They should have lost their entire force in the first attack. But they didn't, Zek 7 replied, studying the battle data. Somehow, their emotional chaos worked in their favor. Back on Earth, Admiral Sullivan was getting similar reports from across human space. The new emotional combat doctrine was working better than anyone had hoped. Human forces were winning battles they should have lost, pulling off victories that seemed impossible. Dr. Elizabeth Turner, a scientist studying captured Confederation technology, made an important discovery. She had been analyzing the aliens' computer systems when she noticed something strange. Their AI networks are incredibly advanced, she explained to Admiral Sullivan. But they have a weakness. They're designed to process logical, predictable data. When faced with truly random or emotional responses, they can't adapt fast enough. You mean their computers can't handle human unpredictability? Kate asked. Exactly. It's like trying to solve a math problem where the numbers keep changing based on feelings. Their systems just can't process it. Ben Parker, Earth's best computer expert, was already seeing the possibilities. If we can create computer viruses based on emotional algorithms, we might be able to crash their entire network. The breakthrough came when Ben and his team developed what they called feeling code, computer programs that made decisions based on simulated emotions rather than pure logic. When they tested it against captured Confederation systems, the results were spectacular. The alien computers just freeze up, Ben explained excitedly. They try to analyze the emotional decision patterns and their processors overload. Meanwhile, human forces were discovering new ways to use their emotions in combat. Anger gave pilots the edge they needed for dangerous maneuvers. Love for their crewmates helped them coordinate without communication systems. Even fear became useful, making soldiers more careful and creative in their tactics. Commander Sarah Brooks led an assault team that rescued survivors from a Confederation prison ship using nothing but their emotional bonds. The team moved like they could read each other's minds, each person knowing exactly what the others needed without being told. "It's not magic," Dr. Peters explained to a group of military officers. "It's empathy. Humans are naturally good at understanding each other's emotions. In combat, that becomes a huge advantage." The Confederation's cold, logical approach to warfare began to crumble against human emotional chaos. Their computer models couldn't predict what humans would do because humans often didn't know themselves until the moment came to act. Captain Alex Rivera proved this during the Battle of Kepler Station. Faced with overwhelming enemy forces, he made a decision that no computer would recommend. He ordered his ships to ram the enemy vessels while his crews evacuated in escape pods. The desperate emotional move caught the aliens completely off guard and saved the colony. "They fight like they're insane," reported Korthak War Chief Gorth to the Confederation leadership. "No logical species would take such risks." "Then we must increase our forces," replied High Arbiter Vex 9. "Crush them quickly before their emotional instability spreads to other species." But it might already be too late. Word of humanity's victories was spreading across the galaxy. Other species under Confederation rule were starting to ask questions. If emotions made humans weak, how were they winning so many battles? Admiral Sullivan stood in her command center, watching reports of human victories pour in from across the galaxy. The aliens had dismissed human emotion as primitive weakness. Now that same emotion was driving the Confederation back on every front. "They still don't understand," she said to Colonel Foster. "They think we're just getting lucky." Amy smiled grimly. "Let them keep thinking that. By the time they figure out what's really happening, it'll be too late." The humans were no longer the weak, emotional species the Confederation had expected to crush easily. They had become something the aliens had never encountered before, an enemy that grew stronger through feelings rather than weaker. And they were just getting started. Jake Harrison stood at the window of the starship New Horizon and looked out at the alien world below. After 3 months of travel through space, they had finally reached Nexus Prime, the capital planet of the Galactic Confederation. This was humanity's first real chance to join the galaxy's biggest alliance of alien species. "Are you ready for this?" asked Captain Lisa Morgan as she walked up beside him. Her blue uniform was perfectly clean, but Jake could see worry in her eyes. "As ready as anyone can be for meeting 12 different alien species," Jake replied. He was Earth's best diplomat, but this was bigger than anything he had ever done before. The future of all humanity might depend on the next few hours. The New Horizon landed at a massive spaceport that stretched as far as the eye could see. Strange ships from across the galaxy sat on landing pads that seemed to float in the air. Some ships looked like giant crystals. Others were made of what appeared to be living metal that moved and shifted on its own. Jake's team walked down the ship's ramp onto the alien world. The air smelled different, like metal and ozone. Ryan Adams, their trade negotiator, carried a briefcase full of Earth's offerings, art, music, and samples of human culture. Dr. Sam Peters, their science advisor, had instruments to measure everything they encountered. "Stay close together," Captain Morgan whispered, "and remember, show respect, but don't show fear." Tall, thin robots waited for them at the bottom of the ramp. But Jake realized these weren't robots at all. They were the Zentari, one of the most powerful species in the Confederation. Their bodies were made of what looked like living silicon, gray and smooth. Where faces should be, they had clusters of blue lights that flickered in patterns. "Humans," said the lead Zentari, in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. "I am High Arbiter Vex 9. You will follow." They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. Jake noticed other aliens watching them pass. Some looked like giant insects with too many eyes. Others were just floating balls of light that whispered to each other in languages that sounded like music. The meeting room was enormous, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. Around a circular table sat representatives from all 12 species of the Confederation. Jake had studied them for months, but seeing them in person was overwhelming. The Korthak looked like bears made of rock, with red eyes that glowed like coals. The ethereal minds of Scion were just brains floating in glass containers connected to the table by cables. The crystalline collective members looked like walking diamonds that sparkled with inner light. "Sit," commanded High Arbiter Vex 9, pointing to chairs that were clearly made for humans. Jake was surprised they had prepared for their visit at all. "We thank you for this opportunity," Jake began, standing to address the gathering. "Humanity seeks friendship and trade with the great Galactic Confederation. We offer our knowledge, our resources, and our loyalty." The aliens made sounds that might have been laughter, though it was hard to tell. The Korthak representative, a massive creature called War Chief Gorth, slammed his stone fist on the table. "What can you possibly offer us, little mammals?" Gorth asked. "Your species is young. Your technology is basic. Your ships are slow and weak." Jake felt heat rise in his face but kept his voice calm. "We may be young, but we learn quickly. Our scientists have made great advances in the past century. Our people are creative and determined." "Determined," repeated High Arbiter Vex 9, and the blue lights on his face flickered faster. "Yes, we have studied your species. You are ruled by emotions, anger, fear, sadness, joy. These chemicals in your brains control your every action." "Ryan." Adams stepped forward, his briefcase clutched tightly in his hands. "Our emotions make us strong. They drive us to protect each other, to explore, to create beautiful things." This time, several aliens made sounds that were definitely laughter. One of the Scion brains pulsed with bright colors. "Emotions are weakness," said the brain through speakers mounted on its container. "They make you unpredictable. They cause you to make poor decisions. They prevent clear thinking." Captain Morgan's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Our emotions help us survive. They help us work together. Human crews fight harder because they care about each other." "Fight harder?" asked War Chief Gorth. Your military records show constant conflicts among your own species. You wage war over resources, beliefs, even skin color. This is strength? Jake could feel his team's frustration growing, but he pushed on. We've learned from our mistakes. We've grown past most of those conflicts. We want to join the galactic community as partners. High Arbiter Vex 9 stood up, his tall form casting a shadow over the human delegation. We have watched your species. For 50 of your years, we have seen your wars, your crimes, your chaos. You are driven by primitive instincts. But we've also seen your art, said Dr. Peters, speaking for the first time. Surely you can appreciate human creativity, our music, our stories, our noise and illusion, interrupted one of the crystalline collective. Its voice sounded like wind chimes. Created by emotional responses, not logic or purpose. Jake tried one more time. What about our colonies near your space? Some have gone silent in recent months. If we could work together, perhaps we could... Your colonies are not our concern, said High Arbiter Vex 9. They exist in disputed space. If they have failed, that is the weakness of emotion showing itself. Captain Morgan stepped forward, her voice shaking with anger. Those colonies have families, children, thousands of innocent people who just wanted to build new homes. And there it is, said Vex 9, the lights on his face pulsing with what looked like satisfaction. Emotional reaction to simple facts. This is why your species will never advance. Ryan Adams opened his briefcase with trembling hands. Please, just look at what we've brought. Examples of human achievement, music that has moved millions of people to... To what? Asked War Chief Gorth. To cry? To dance? To waste time on meaningless activities? We have conquered star systems while you compose songs about your feelings. The Cyan brain's colors shifted to what Jake somehow knew was contempt. Your neural patterns are chaotic, random. No logical species would trust you with important tasks. Jake felt the meeting slipping away from them. Everything they had hoped for, everything humanity needed, was disappearing because these aliens saw their emotions as weakness. We offer trade agreements, he said desperately. Mining rights, scientific cooperation. On our terms only, said High Arbiter Vex 9. You will stay in your designated sectors. You will not expand beyond the systems we permit. You will provide raw materials in exchange for basic technology. That's not partnership, said Captain Morgan. That's servitude. That is reality, replied Vex 9. Your species is ruled by chemical reactions and irrational impulses. Emotion makes you weak, unpredictable, and ultimately inferior. You will never advance beyond your current primitive state while you remain slaves to your feelings. The meeting was over. Jake's team was escorted back to their ship with minimal trade concessions and a long list of restrictions. As the New Horizon lifted off from Nexus Prime, Jake looked back at the alien world and wondered if humanity would ever find its place among the stars. Behind them, in the meeting room, the aliens discussed the humans like scientists discussing an interesting but ultimately useless specimen. They had no idea that by dismissing human emotion as weakness, they had just made their greatest mistake.